Perfect.
Okay, ready to go. Yael, it is wonderful to see you. Thank you for joining us at Kosher Giving. The previous time to last time that I saw you was probably about 10 years ago when I hosted you here in the city of Ariel. I'm in Ariel right now. At the time, I was running the Ariel Foundation, and you were doing amazing work with the fellowship, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And then I bumped into you at the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv a couple of weeks ago. I told you what we were doing at koshergiving.com, and you graciously accepted our invitation to join us on this webcast. So thank you for joining us, Yael.
Thank you so much for having me. I think it's incredible that so quickly the Jewish world has been able to mobilize, not only in order to meet the changing needs, but in order to identify the changing trends in giving and the key principles that will help us sustain this amazing achdut, unity that we have of people who are standing with Israel and meeting the needs in the most urgent way as they arise. So I think it's great that you're thinking along those lines and moving quickly to make that happen.
Yes, well, speed is a big piece of this because obviously this crisis caught us. It caught us off guard, and us, the collective us, not you and I, but basically everybody. For some reason, it sometimes seems like Israel and Israel's friends are really, really good at not only resilience, but at this quick response, knowing immediately what to do and how to list themselves and how to throw themselves into things. But you mentioned also the mobilization of the community. And I actually want to take a step back before we speak about the Iron Swords War. Have a look a little bit about what it is that the fellowship does for those who might be a little bit less familiar. The International the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, which is not just the Jewish community, of course, Christians as well, perhaps primarily. What do you do on a day-by-day basis?
So the fellowship was started 40 years ago by my father, Rabbi Yael Eckstein of blessed memory, who had this vision of twofold, really. One, engaging for the first time in history the friends that we have. So there's never been a time that Israel or the Jewish people have been in a time of crisis and that we've suddenly had millions, some might even estimate tens of millions or hundreds of millions of friends that are standing with us, like we do right now in the Christian community. And this is a relatively new and fragile relationship, which is why I believe it's so important to invest in it. But my father had this vision 40 years ago of starting to really take a step to invest in the relationship between Christian Zionists and this new generation that stands with Israel, that loves Israel, that wants to help Israel. And by doing that in a totally non-political way, also being able to meet humanitarian needs of Israel and the Jewish people around the world. And so we essentially have three different pillars. One is Aliyah Klita, Aliyah absorption from non-Western countries. So that's mostly Ukraine, across the former Soviet Union, Ethiopia, etc. The second area is poverty, which again is for Israel and the former Soviet Union, and the third is the broad area of security, both in Israel and to secure Jewish institutions around the world that are at risk. So when October 7th happened, we have already been in this area of security. We've built over 5,000 bomb shelters on the northern and southern border. We're in daily contact with heads of security of all the northern and southern towns and equipped hospitals. We'll talk about it soon. But essentially, we were very well positioned to be able to act immediately on October 7th and not start to assess what the needs were.
Wow. First of all, I love the fact that you speak about three pillars. We've got this, Kosher Giving, the book, begins with these three pillars of kosher giving. And we speak about having, from the individual's perspective, the purpose that they have, what's their purpose in giving. The other end of the spectrum is the needs, and then the bridge builders in between. The fellowship, for example, is a bridge builder, but it's actually a series of bridge builders. And so sorry for taking those three pillars in a different context. I'm just seeing everything from a particular framework. But if we go back for a second, so that's the fellowship in general. And you've already alluded to the pre-war and the needs of the current war themselves. What happened as the war hit? How did you respond most immediately?
Well, Avi, I think it goes very much back to what you were saying as far as those three pillars, whether it's in your book or the three pillars that I identified that the fellowship is focused on, that just as important as it is to know what you are focused on, it's important to know what you're not focused on. No one can do everything, including the government that relies on the nonprofit sector in order to meet certain needs. And the nonprofit sector relies on the government to meet certain needs. So within the nonprofit sector or individual giving, it's critical that you know what is your goal, what is your purpose, what is your focus. And within that, you can have a certain percentage that goes outside of that core mission or outside of that core perspective, but to always be assessing yourself, am I staying within my mission? Am I staying within my goals? And your budget and the program allocation should represent that. And so on October 7th, we were that structure that we've built of what we're focused on, which are those three very concrete, tangible, and clear areas of giving: aliyah, poverty, security, and the way that we distribute it as well. We're very well defined, and what helped us act immediately on October 7th. On October 7th, the way that I would describe it is that the people who were always the responders suddenly became the victims. The head of welfare from the Eshkol region was kidnapped and brought to Gaza Strip. We had municipal social workers they're the ones who are usually the individuals who are going to alert family members that their families were killed. We're going out and bringing food to the areas where there's a crisis, or organizing the basic needs that need to happen in their city. Suddenly, they were the ones whose family members were killed, they themselves were killed. And so the entire infrastructure of local government, and in many ways national government, on October 7th disappeared. There was nothing organized in order to meet the needs of the people. So on October 7th, we were in touch with everyone from the municipal social workers and workers in Sderot to Shar HaNegev to Eshkol, every single region where we have our already connections built, like I said, since the 2006 war, Second Lebanon War, when we decided we're going into this area of securities, when we started developing these relationships. And so we were in constant contact with them as the terrorists were roaming to say, what do you need? How can we help? Because we have workers in those cities, we have volunteers in those cities, we have partners in those cities. And so I would say for the first 3 days, the needs were very dynamic. In the first moment, we opened up a $5 million budget just for the first week, that we said, whatever needs we identify right now that we're able to meet, we're doing it. No bureaucracy, no roundtable, not even looking at budget and where this $5 million is going to come from. When you're in a position that every minute is the difference between life and death, you act to save lives, period. And so we met lots of different needs on those first week, from the families from the kibbutzim who were freed from their shelters after 30 hours sometimes, that the local municipality said, we don't even have the ability to bring them food and water, and many of them are coming without shoes. Could you provide that for them? So we set up food and water for those who were being freed from their shelters in the kibbutzim. At the Sderot municipality is where they asked people to come to find out the fate of their loved ones. Again, providing food, water, a place to sit, chairs, and even to the extent of when you go to tell a family member, Shalom Eda, we should never know, that their loved one was killed, you need 2 municipal social workers there. You need 2 social workers to go to the family. And Sderot didn't have 2 that could go. So we actually had one of our workers go with the municipal social worker as the terrorists were still roaming in Sderot. When they confirmed that someone was killed, they would go to the homes and tell them. So that transformed into, once they started evacuation, they needed they didn't have the ability to evacuate people who were sick or in a wheelchair or on a bed lying down or handicapped. And so the fellowship filled that niche in the evacuation. And when they set up a tent to identify the 1,400 bodies of people who were killed, the Homefront Command asked us to set up a separate tent right next door with food, with water, with mattresses, with chairs, in order to provide for the families, who many families came and said, we're not leaving until we identify our loved ones. And so we were there with volunteers around the clock for 3 weeks. It ended up being providing for the basic needs of the people gathered. So I would say the needs changed. At that point, there was no strategy beyond work with the officials, not the people on the ground, because you talk to 10 people and there's 10 different needs identified, but work with the officials, Pikuda Oref, the Home Front Command, the local welfare department, the mayors of the cities, the head of security of each city, identify what the needs are. And when you're able to meet those needs, do it now. So that wasn't strategic planning. That wasn't budget planning. That was immediate life-saving aid. And that's how we operated for the first week.
Wow, that's actually really, first of all, it's amazing that you have the infrastructure. You're uniquely positioned because there are a lot of organizations that are, there is a lot of significant funding for programs, but they don't have the infrastructure that you have here on the ground. They may have a representative in Israel, if they're lucky. They usually have some affiliates. But what I'm hearing from you is you're really not even working with the affiliate. Your affiliate in this case is the government, or it's actually the operations on the ground that can at least provide some sort of input as to best practices, because otherwise, like you say, speak to 10 people, you go in 10 different directions at least. I would even add that one of the challenges, as we've seen it, is that because of some of the amazing initiatives here, all of how civil society has really just kicked into gear and mobilized in a way that's really, I think it should be a global model for how civil society kicks in times of crisis. Still, not everybody knows how to handle significant sums of money or where to make things go. What would you say to somebody who's kind of on the other end of things, maybe one of your donors, they don't have the infrastructure that you have, and it could be an individual donor or an organization. There are several steps removed. How could they, on the other end of things, be in a place of effective giving when, again, they're just so distant without that kind of operational infrastructure on the ground?
Well, it's a great question. And it's a question that we had to ask ourselves in real time. During that first week, our model was distribute aid wherever is needed to whoever it's needed to, and have no policy, strategy, or model of giving, just give and go and do what you can, which is very unlike the fellowship. That's very strategic and is very specific work plan and very specific partners. And our budget is divided between what we do directly versus what we do with grants versus what we do with the government. So in our work plan, we have everything down to the T, but my philosophy is plan as much as you can and plan for the ability to be agile during emergency. And so if there's no emergency, you have your work plan that you don't need to reassess it at all during the year. You know what's expected, where the money goes, who you're giving it to, how you're distributing it to which categories, but you need to have that agility. If you're going to be a first responders organization, that within a second you're able to pivot. And so I think the creation of these grassroots organizations and movements, many of them aren't even necessarily organizations, meaning registered nonprofits, but they're individuals who said, what can I do? I'm going to do it now. And it was inspiring, as we say, Mi K'amcha Israel, who are like the people of Israel. This is where we know how to shine. And instead of transforming into a nation of victims after October 7th, which I think would be a pretty legitimate response, actually. We actually responded as givers, as empowered. And so the fellowship within that first week assessed everything that was happening on the ground. And we realized there are so many nonprofits along with grassroots movements popping up. And so what we said was, as a policy, we're not able to fund those exactly because of what you said. There's no financial accountability there. They're doing amazing work, but are they doing it in the most cost-effective way as possible? Not necessarily. Are they doing it according to criteria? And not necessarily. So we wanted that grassroots movement to take off, to see what they were helping with. And then as the largest philanthropic organization in Israel, to be able to identify the voids where they aren't getting to. What are these larger areas that, as a registered established nonprofit, we're able to move into and maybe coordinate, work with as far as distributing the aid, but not as far as distributing funds. And so what we decided was we're going to distribute aid in one of three ways. And to this day, in the past few months, we've distributed over $15 million. in aid in one of these three ways. One is grants to partners, and there are around 6 national organizations who are able to mobilize immediately, just like the fellowship was. And we said those are our partners. They're able to work nationally, they're able to mobilize immediately. They're all partners who we've worked with in the past. So we already have that relationship as far as expectations and reporting and accountability, et cetera. So one way was that we created new programs with our partner organizations. We don't have to do it ourselves. If they have the staff and the workers and volunteers to do it, wonderful. We give them a grant and create a new project. The second way is to create programs and actually bring it to the government in order to fund. Because what we realize is the government has money, the government has funding, and they're happy to give it to effective programs. They're just not very good at creating new programs with criteria and mode of operation, et cetera.
Government isn't the place for innovation. That's just not.
Exactly. So we created a program, for example, for all 250,000 mifunim, the refugees, the evacuated people. They have basic needs, and those needs are falling on the municipal social workers in the cities that they've been moved to, which anyways, before this crisis was on the verge of falling apart. So we created a model where the municipal social workers have the ability to distribute aid to the evacuees in whatever city they are. The fellowship created this program with all the details of it. The government immediately gave 10 million shekel matching to the fellowship's 10 million shekel. And that's a way you can't go one by one to all 250,000 refugees, but you could create a system based on government employees that the fellowship doesn't have to do that in order to meet all their needs. So that's the second way. And the third way is when we identify a need that no one else is able to meet, the fellowship will do it ourselves. So an example of that is the kitot hitgonenut, that after this crisis,
The first responders.
Exactly, these social, local security individuals, locals from the community who stepped up in order to secure their cities, but they didn't have any gear. So the fellowship distributed over 5,000 flak jackets and helmets to these kitot hitgonenut, these local security teams on every city on the northern and southern border. So those are the three ways that we operate, and so far it's proven very effective in identifying the needs, identifying a program that we want to do in order to meet the needs, and quick, effective, bureaucracy-free mode of distribution. And so what I would say to answer your question, Avi, of how can people who don't necessarily have this infrastructure be able to contribute to helping in this larger, broader way, I think that the main fundamental principle is trust. You have to find an organization that you align with their values and that you trust that they're going to be able to effectively carry out what your mission is. Because I don't think organizations should shift to meet the donor needs, but I think the donor should find the organization that naturally fits with their set of values and objectives in their philanthropic giving. So once you align with an organization's mission statement, mode of distribution, strategy, and aid that they're tangibly distributing on the ground, I think that it's a perfect fit. And I know from my experience, right when this crisis started, I had actually a Jewish donor. Most of our donors are Christian, who called me and said, Yael, I know how the fellowship works. I like how the fellowship works. I'm giving you $1.5 million to start operating now so you won't have a cash flow issue. And that was the most, first of all, encouraging as a leader, that there are people who stand behind, see what we're doing, appreciate it, and are willing to back us. But it also, just in a tangible way, that was the foundation that gave us the ability to raise over $20 million in emergency funding in the next 2.5 months.
Well, that says a lot. First of all, I feel like either you read the Kosher Giving book or you wrote the Kosher Giving book, because this is, it's just 100% everything from strategy to also knowing how to shift and pivot. Of course, I love what you said about knowing what you are doing is also knowing what you're not doing. You need to know when to say no. And that's very, very hard. Yael, what you're sharing here is not an easy thing to do for an organization, especially when the needs are as profound as they are. But when you know that you're creating so much impact in so many different directions, and you're doing so with that careful balance between the strategy and the flexibility, that you know you're just on the right track. And a lot of these initiatives where they really mean well, they for whatever reason just really couldn't follow through, and ultimately they're still benefiting from the same strategic work that you've been able to do. I'll just, as a parentheses, and a quick question, and I have another couple questions for you, but real quick, I will say that Kosher Giving is the child of our Sector 4 company, Sector 4 Strategy, which is an advisory. And one of the things that we've done, not for our donor clientele, but actually for the nonprofits, is a nonprofit accelerator, where we take nonprofits and we take them from that place, that very nascent stage. And some of them are pretty advanced, but really need to accelerate their processes. And as a cohort, we can really bring them to a better place. But you're right, it's not the sort of thing that you can do at the very beginning of the war. And there were some people who spoke to us about doing that, but it was so scrappy and gritty at the beginning for all the right reasons that it just wasn't ready. I think some of those are ready now, but the first couple of weeks, it was just too early. The quick question though, just the flat jackets, those are really an interesting story, because so many people had these stories about trying to fund these, the jackets and the bulletproof vests and make sure everybody has the equipment that they need, because unfortunately, Israel really, was unprepared. But the Ministry of Defense wasn't giving approval to some. People were sending in things that weren't camouflaged. I was like, if you ordered the hot pink jackets, you want to send those back. That's not going to work. I don't think anybody actually did that. But, is it because of your size, your logistics? What was it that made it you able to order 5,000 and just distribute those?
It's a great question, Avi, and it goes back to what we were speaking about previously, knowing where we could be effective. We realized from the beginning we were getting, endless requests for aid from different units in the Army for these flak jackets and other equipment. And we realized immediately we can't go into this. Why? Because we wanted to avoid the issues that you're talking about. There's so many potential issues from the starting point of how do we assess which unit really needs and really doesn't need. There are hundreds of units. We don't have the capability to do proper assessment on each unit, what they need, what they don't need. So that's from the beginning to the more complicated area of there are regulations here. You can't just go out to the store and buy gear for an army during times of war. So from the first moment that we identified that need, then we were getting so many requests for it. We said we're not going into it because we didn't feel like we could. We didn't feel like we could meet the need in the most appropriate way, most strategic way, most effective way. And so when we feel like we can't meet a need, we say we're not going to go into it. In the beginning, we even said, okay, maybe we have 4 staff members who were going into fighter units in their miluim, in their reserve duty. And so we said, maybe we'll just give to their units because their units were so desperately needed. We say, okay, for our staff who's working so hard to provide for everyone all year, a little bit limited, we could do a deep dive into those units that we're able to do for 4 units. And even within that, we said, we can't do it. We're either doing it for everyone or we're doing it for no one. So we scrapped that idea, even just for the sake of being strategic and working according to criteria with no exceptions. That being said, we knew there was a real need for these bulletproof vests. And because we have been doing it for so long, because we've been distributing this aid for so long, we already have not only a contact with the company who makes it, but for all the most basic security need items, from bomb shelters to bulletproof vests, we have relationships with the companies that we say during times of war, we already prepay for a certain amount so we could immediately take it and distribute it. So for example, we were able to place 30 bomb shelters in the first week and a half of war because we already organized it with the company beforehand. And so that's the same for the vest. So we looked for what are the criteria that we can set. So we're not getting constant requests for help from, again, a million different places that we have to assess each time. But we proactively set the criteria for who we want to help, that we can distribute this aid that will be immediate, life-saving, and without any bureaucracy or regulations. And what we saw there immediately were these kitot hitgonenut, the local security response teams. That what happened was they did have gear. There was the ongoing local security response teams for the different cities. They had their bulletproof vests and their helmet, but then they were called up for reserve duty and they took it with them to the field, which makes sense. And so the new people who came in to fit that need and to meet that need of securing their cities, they no longer had gear. And like we all know, the gear was nearly impossible to find. So you have people standing in Kiryat Shmona on the north or Metula, which is less than a mile away from Hezbollah terrorists, or even down down south. Also the Kitot Gonanut didn't have these security teams. And so we created this criteria. Anyone on the northern, southern border and the Kitotit Gonanut who don't have, we will distribute it to. And we worked with the Homefront Command in order to identify those communities. So once again, we're not calling one by one, but we're working with the larger body that's able to do that assessment. And then within a span of 4.5 weeks, we distributed to all of the northern border, all of the southern border, and Judea and Samaria, which we realized had the same issue.
Wow. Amazing. Yael, I've got two more questions for you, and they may be quick. The questions are short. I'm not sure what you have to share with us. The first question is, again, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Ultimately, you're working with these two faith communities. And, there's been some talk about the differences between the ways that these communities, both close, dedicated friends to Israel, largely for the Christian community, thanks to the work that your father had begun, are they working differently? Are there different ways to engage the communities? And I guess this is a question for both the donors who are thinking about who they might want to be partnering with, and like you say, what kind of values organizations are going to be in line with them. Also, people have conversations with their friends or their associates, and how can people be thinking about, especially when Israel is such an issue and this war, and we're not going to focus on this from an advocacy perspective, but it's such an issue where people are so torn about the issue. How are these communities best engaged?
Well, I think that the first step is to establish that we do want to engage them, which isn't a given, unfortunately. I personally believe that there are so many Jewish philanthropists, leaders who are investing in trying to change the minds of our enemies. What I say is try to engage and keep the friends we have, give information to the friends that we have instead of trying to change the minds of those who hate us. That I don't personally believe that it's even going to work, no matter how much money you throw
More
at it.
effective investment.
More effective investment. And so that's why I spend my time, I do between 2 and 6 interviews a day and reach out to the Christian community, because they stand with us. They love us. They realize how strategic this relationship is for both communities, and they want to continue to engage in it. It's on us to continue to engage with them, to give them the talking points, to explain to them what's going on in a way that isn't necessarily based on the same talking points or perspective as the Jewish community. And so I think, like every situation, you talk to people in a way that they're able to understand it. And so when you talk to a child, you speak in one way. When you speak to a professor, you speak to in another way. And you speak to your elderly mother, you speak in another way. And so I think that no matter who we're talking to, which is a lot more broad and defined than the Jewish and Christian community, you have to realize who you're talking to and be able to engage them in a way that speaks to them, not that we feel good with our talking points. And so to see the Christian community engaged right now with Israel, I think for me and the fellowship, it's been inspiring that they want one thing, and it's relatively simple: to tell the Jewish people, you are not alone. And that for me is everything. It's more valuable even than the millions of dollars they're investing into this country.
Wow, that's powerful, Yael. I feel like there's another conversation for another time about really the challenges with maybe the Christian community, especially the younger generation, which is meeting certain content or concepts and theories on their college campuses, which are different than maybe what they're hearing in church as to how they see the Jewish people, how they see Israel. But that's really a challenge that some people might take for granted, the fact, oh, sure, Israel has some Christian friends, or maybe even many Christian friends, and doesn't realize that is a battleground in and of itself. And so keep up the good work, and maybe, again, another conversation for another time. There's one more question specific to this particular time. Maybe if you could kind of look at yourself from the outside for a second. You mentioned your father, who had founded the fellowship already 40 years back, your father of blessed memory. And he's obviously looking down, very proud about everything that you're doing, everything that the fellowship is doing. But of all these things that you just mentioned, and there are a lot, what do you think he's most proud of?
Well, I feel like I'm reaping the benefits and picking the fruits from everything that my father invested his life in, with no small amount of sweat, tears, and aggravation. And I think one of the things that he was so insistent on is that the fellowship will not just be another nonprofit as far as how we distribute the aid, as far as how we engage our donors. We're going to be a fellowship. We're going to be both, as far as for our donors, a place that is a sort of community, not just that they give money and that's it. And as far as the distribution side, we're going to be as professional as any organization could possibly hold itself to those standards. And so effective distribution, according to criteria, an organization that even the government with all of their crazy kind of regulations and would feel comfortable investing in, an organization that's quick and able to mobilize without bureaucracy or roundtables. What my father wanted to be was an organization that was able to get to the people while keeping the most highest professional standards and still not being held back by bureaucracy, which I think in most situations feels like an oxymoron. How do you hold both of those is the question. And so I think the fact that he was able to build that foundation for the fellowship of professional, quick giving directly to the people without bureaucracy, and we were able to maintain it along with the reality that we have over 750,000 donors around the world.
Wow.
And the fact that they're engaged and feel the sense of community and appreciation. I think those are the standards that my father lived and died by, and that we are dedicated to keeping up.
Wow, yeah. Oh, you've inspired me to follow through with an idea that we're putting together right now with our Kosher Giving community, is really to create this Kosher Giving society that's not just about, certain principles and how do I run my giving plan, but it's that community. And so thank you for that encouragement. Yael, there is so much to speak about, but I think we're going to close this conversation for today. You clearly have your work cut out for you. All of us do. Everyone who's involved in Israel, everyone who's associated with Israel, everyone who cares about Israel. This war is, as we speak, still going on. And there are certain projects that only begin the day after the war ends. We're going to be rebuilding. And there are people who unfortunately are suffering from post-trauma. There's so much that's going to have to go on. And so I believe this is an ongoing conversation. Yael, thank you so much for everything. And really, the insights are powerful. You've certainly given a lot of validity from your real life experiences to things that it is that we're trying to advance with so many other associates. And so really, thank you for everything. It's really amazing conversation.
Thank you so much, Avi, and keep up your important work.
Thank you.